The stars shimmered like scattered diamonds against the endless black canvas of space. Jack Harrow, an adventurous human explorer, stared at the blinking red lights on his ship's control panel with a sinking feeling. His vessel, the Wayfinder, was his pride and joy. Until now. An unexpected meteor storm had damaged key systems, forcing him to make an emergency landing on an uncharted planet labeled Erindra 4 on his navigation charts. The descent had been bumpy, with gravity pulling harder than Jack anticipated. He clenched the controls as the ship groaned under the strain. When it finally landed with a jarring thud, Jack let out a sigh of relief. But relief was short-lived. Outside the viewport, an alien jungle sprawled endlessly, filled with massive trees that glowed faintly in hues of blue and green. The air shimmered with what looked like fireflies, their light pulsating in an almost musical rhythm. Jack stepped out cautiously, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, moss-like ground. The air was dense but breathable, and a symphony of alien wildlife filled his ears. Chirps, hums, and distant roars. Grabbing a toolkit and a portable scanner, Jack set to work inspecting his ship's damages. "This'll take days to fix," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his short, sandy hair. The fuel processor was fried, the communication array was beyond repair, and the engine coolant system had a leak. He needed to find water, clean, abundant water, to synthesize the coolant. The scanner beeped faintly, indicating a water source not too far from his crash site. Slinging a pack over his shoulder, Jack set off into the jungle. The path was wild and untamed, with roots twisting like coiled snakes and plants that seemed to pulse with bioluminescent light. Occasionally, he paused to examine the flora, marveling at their alien beauty. As he trekked further, the jungle opened into a wide clearing bathed in an ethereal glow. Towering crystal-like structures stood in a circular formation, their surfaces glimmering with refracted light. At the center of the clearing, a group of tall, slender beings with skin like polished silver stood in a loose circle. They'd moved with a grace that made them seem as though they were gliding rather than walking. Jack froze, unsure whether to approach or retreat. The beings, clearly intelligent, hadn't noticed him yet. They were focused on what seemed to be a ceremonial dance. Their movements were synchronized, their long limbs weaving patterns in the air. Strange symbols glowed faintly on the ground beneath them, pulsating in time with their motions. "Great," Jack whispered to himself. "First contact, and I'm about to crash their dance party." He took a cautious step back, hoping to retreat unnoticed, but fate had other plans. His boot caught on a root, and he stumbled forward with an audible grunt. The sound echoed louder than he expected, and all motion in the clearing ceased. Every alien head turned toward him, their large, luminous eyes locking onto his figure. Jack's heart pounded. This was not how he had imagined his first encounter with extraterrestrial life. One of the beings stepped forward, taller than the rest and adorned with intricate markings on its silver skin. It tilted its head, studying Jack intently. Then, to his surprise, the alien raised a slender hand in what looked like a gesture of greeting. Jack hesitated before raising his own hand in return. "Hi there," he said awkwardly. "I come in peace, I think." The aliens exchanged looks, their expressions unreadable to Jack. Then, as if reaching a consensus, they parted to form a pathway toward the center of the clearing. The tallest one gestured for him to step forward. Jack swallowed hard. This wasn't exactly on his to-do list, but refusing could be seen as disrespectful, or worse, threatening. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the clearing, feeling every pair of eyes on him. As he reached the center, he noticed that the glowing symbols on the ground had shifted. The patterns now resembled a spiral, radiating outward from where he stood. A low hum filled the air, resonating deep in his chest. The tall alien approached him again, this time holding a small crystalline object that emitted a faint, soothing light. It extended the object toward Jack, who hesitated before taking it. As his fingers closed around the smooth surface, a wave of warmth spread through his hand, and his translator device buzzed to life. "Welcome," a calm, melodic voice said in his ear. "You have arrived at the right of choosing." Jack blinked in confusion. The what? Before he could get an answer, the group around him began to chant softly, their voices blending into a hauntingly beautiful harmony. The clearing pulsed with energy, and Jack realized that whatever he had stumbled into, it was far more significant than he could have imagined. Jack's heart raced as the alien group continued their chanting. The hum resonated deeper now, as though it was stirring something inside him. He glanced at the tall alien who had given him the crystal, wondering if this was some sort of greeting or ritual. The translator device buzzed in his ear again, as though it was trying to catch up with the strange sounds. "Chosen one," the device echoed softly. "Come forward to be honored." Jack frowned. "Chosen one," he muttered to himself, clearly baffled. He'd been hoping for a simple hello and some directions on how to fix his ship, but this was way beyond anything he had expected. He glanced around the clearing, searching for any sign of clarity. The other beings were still chanting, their movements graceful, almost like they were part of the very air itself. There was a calmness about them that Jack couldn't quite understand, but it was clear that they weren't afraid of him. Instead, they seemed eager. One of the aliens, a woman with hair that shimmered like silver threads under the light, approached him. Her eyes, large and glowing softly, met his, and for a moment, Jack felt a strange pull, a mix of curiosity and something deeper. She studied him for a moment before speaking, her voice smooth and melodic. "You have come from the stars, human," she said, her tone neither demanding nor aggressive. "We have awaited you." Jack blinked. "Waited for me?" He didn't know if he should feel flattered or worried. "I'm just a regular guy. I crashed my ship here by accident." The woman smiled gently, though her smile was oddly distant. "The right of choosing is sacred. We have waited for the one who would unite the stars with our people. It is you, the one who has arrived from the heavens." Jack's mind raced as he processed her words. He tried to explain himself again, but the more he spoke, the more confused the aliens seemed. Their eyes were filled with admiration and expectancy. He couldn't tell if they understood him at all. It felt like he was in the middle of something far bigger than he could wrap his head around. The woman, who seemed to be some kind of leader or elder, extended her hand to him, and Jack felt an overwhelming sense of calm wash over him. "Come," she said softly. "Join us in the circle." Unsure but feeling strangely compelled, Jack stepped forward. His boots crunching softly on the ground, he found himself standing in the middle of the alien circle, all their eyes fixed on him. The chanting grew louder, more intense, as if it were reaching a crescendo. The woman nodded to the others, and the rest of the aliens slowly moved aside. A male alien, much taller than Jack, stepped forward. His skin was darker, almost like polished stone, and his eyes burned with a focused intensity. The alien's gaze met Jack's, and for a moment, there was an unspoken challenge in the air. Jack didn't know what was going on, but he didn't like the way the situation felt. The tall alien spoke in a low, resonant voice. "You are strong, human. The right of choosing will reveal whether you are worthy of the bond." Jack furrowed his brow, clearly more confused than ever. "Bond? What bond? I'm just trying to fix my ship and get out of here." The leader woman smiled gently again, her voice soft. "Do not fear, human. You are here for a reason. The choosing is an honor. It is not something anyone can refuse. The women of our tribe will choose the one who will lead with us." "Lead?" Jack repeated, now even more confused. "I'm no leader. I'm just a guy with a busted-up ship. I don't know anything about leading a whole tribe of aliens." The alien woman stepped closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. It was firm but comforting. "The choosing will decide. You will prove yourself, and we will see your worth." Jack opened his mouth to protest, but then the chanting reached a fever pitch. The entire group was now circling around him, their movements becoming faster, more deliberate. They seemed to be waiting for him to do something, but Jack had no idea what that something was. Before he could ask again, one of the alien women, a warrior who was shorter than the rest, but with sharp, piercing eyes, approached him. She studied him with the intensity of a hunter sizing up her prey, then nodded as if she had made a decision. With a smooth motion, she took his hand, holding it firmly in hers. Jack's heart skipped a beat, but before he could react, she spoke in the same melodic voice. "You are to join the trials. You will show your strength and wisdom. Only then will we know if you are worthy to be with us." The words hung in the air like an invisible weight. Jack felt the pressure of the moment bearing down on him. He didn't want to upset anyone, but how could he possibly compete with what he was assuming were highly advanced beings? Suddenly, a small figure, a child with glowing purple eyes, tugged at Jack's sleeve. "Will you help us?" she asked innocently. Jack looked down at her, confused. "Help with what?" The child smiled. "With the choosing. It is your turn now." Before Jack could answer, the others stepped forward and gestured for him to follow. Their faces were serious, their eyes fixed on him, and the atmosphere had shifted completely. What had started as an accidental encounter was now evolving into something much more complex and possibly dangerous. Jack knew one thing for certain. He had no choice but to see this through, even if he had no idea what was going on. Jack stood at the center of the alien circle, his heart racing. His mind buzzed with confusion and uncertainty. The chanting had stopped, but the air was thick with anticipation. Around him, the Thrissa women, tall, graceful beings with skin like shimmering silver, watched him closely, their luminous eyes filled with expectation. There was no way out of this. Jack realized that whatever the ceremony was, it had already swept him into its current, and he was being carried along whether he wanted to or not. One of the women, the tall one who had first greeted him, stepped forward again. She had a presence that was both calming and intense, like the calm before a storm. Her eyes never left Jack as she spoke. "You are here by fate, human," she said, her voice soft but firm. "The choosing must proceed. Your strength, wisdom, and worth will be tested." She paused, allowing the words to sink in. "But you must know, the choosing is not just about physical strength. It is about how you align with us, how you understand our ways, and perhaps how you may become one of us." Jack swallowed hard. He had no idea what this ritual involved, but now it was clear that this was more than just some cultural ceremony. It was a test of something far more important. He had no idea how to align with them. His only focus had been getting out of here and back to his ship. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just an accident. These beings had waited for him. He didn't know why, but they had. Before he could say anything in response, the tall alien motioned for the others to prepare. Several of the women began moving toward the edges of the clearing, gathering strange tools and objects that Jack didn't recognize. Some of them seemed to shimmer in the air as though they were made of light. The whole atmosphere felt different now, more serious, more intense. The leader, still holding her calm, steady presence, turned to Jack and explained, "The trials are simple but profound. You will face challenges that test both your mind and body. We will observe you, how you respond, how you act. That will decide if you are worthy." Jack nodded, though he still felt like he was in way over his head. He wasn't an athlete. He was a mechanic. His strength came from his hands, his mind, not from his muscles. How was he supposed to compete against these beings, who seemed to be a perfect blend of power and grace? He didn't even know what was at stake here. All he knew was that he had to survive. First, the leader woman said, "You will face the test of balance." A young Thrissa woman, shorter than the others, but with sharp eyes, stepped forward. She held a glowing object in her hands, a thin rod of light that flickered like a flame. She placed it on the ground and gestured for Jack to approach. "This is the rod of harmony," she explained. "It is a tool of balance. You must walk its length without falling. For balance is at the core of our culture. Only those who find harmony with the world around them may lead us. Jack glanced at the rod. It was slender, glowing faintly, and no wider than his wrist. He wasn't sure what to expect, but it didn't look too hard, right? How difficult could walking on a glowing rod be? He took a deep breath, focused, and stepped forward. The moment his foot touched the rod, he felt a strange sensation ripple through his body. It was as if the ground beneath him was shifting, constantly changing its shape, making it harder to find his footing. The rod wobbled slightly, and Jack nearly lost his balance. But he kept his focus. This was just like balancing on a narrow beam back home, something he'd done many times. He just needed to concentrate. Slowly, he began to walk, taking one careful step at a time. The Thrissa women watched him in silence, their faces unreadable. Jack felt their eyes on him, but he refused to be distracted. With each step, his confidence grew, and soon enough, he reached the end of the rod without falling. The young woman who had presented the test nodded in approval. "You have done well," she said, her tone respectful. "You have found balance." Jack let out a small breath of relief, grateful for the small victory. But he knew this was just the beginning. The next test loomed ahead, and it seemed like the stakes were only going to get higher from here. The leader woman stepped forward again. "Next, you will face the test of mind," she announced. "This is where your true worth will be determined." Jack wasn't sure what she meant by that, but he had a sinking feeling it wasn't going to be as simple as walking across a glowing rod. The women moved swiftly, gathering in a circle around Jack, their faces all serious now. The soft chants had stopped, and there was only the stillness of the clearing. Jack's nerves began to rise again, his thoughts racing. What kind of mind test were they going to throw at him? A figure stepped forward, a young alien woman holding a glowing stone, larger than any he'd seen before. She placed the stone on the ground between them, and as soon as it touched the earth, the ground beneath them hummed, filling the air with a low, pulsing sound. Jack could feel it in his chest, and a sense of deep unease crept over him. "This is the test of knowledge," the leader said, her eyes never leaving him. "Solve the riddle, and you will prove your wisdom." Jack gulped. A riddle. That was something he could work with, if he had enough time to think. But the pressure of the moment was mounting. There was no turning back now. Jack stood before the glowing stone, his heart still pounding from the balance test. The air around him hummed with anticipation, and the Thrissa women watched him closely, their eyes glowing with quiet intensity. He could feel the pressure of the moment weighing on him. There was no room for failure here. He had to prove his worth, but how? The stone in front of him pulsed softly, casting shadows that seemed to move across the clearing. The leader woman, who had been guiding him through the trials, stepped forward again. Her face was serious, but there was a slight softness in her eyes that gave Jack a small sense of comfort. "You will answer this riddle," she said. "Solve it, and you will pass this test. Fail, and you will leave us." Jack's throat felt dry. He had never been the best at riddles. Back home, he'd always been more of a mechanic than a scholar, more interested in fixing things than solving puzzles. But this wasn't just about fixing machines. This was about understanding something deeper. Understanding them. The leader woman spoke again, her voice steady. "Listen carefully, human. This is the riddle. What has no voice but speaks to all? What has no body but moves through all? What has no form but gives life to all?" The words hung in the air like an ancient song, their meaning unclear to Jack. He repeated the riddle in his mind, trying to break it down. His eyes scanned the stone before him, hoping for a clue. The Thrissa women remained silent, watching him closely, their faces unreadable. Jack took a deep breath and thought about the riddle. It felt like it was asking about something bigger than just an object or a simple idea. Something intangible, something that existed beyond what he could see. After a few moments of silence, Jack looked up at the leader woman. "The answer is Energy, he said slowly. Energy doesn't have a voice, but it moves through everything. It doesn't have a body, but it powers everything. It doesn't have a form, but it makes everything alive. The moment he spoke the words, the stone in front of him began to glow brighter. The humming sound that had filled the air grew louder, like the sound of distant thunder. For a second, Jack thought he had gotten it wrong. But then, to his surprise, the leader woman's lips curved into a smile. "You have answered correctly," she said, her voice full of approval. "You have shown wisdom beyond what we expected." Jack let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. A wave of relief washed over him. He hadn't been sure, but it felt good to have solved the riddle. He was still in the game, still moving forward. But even as the test was over, Jack knew the hardest part was still to come. The Thrissa women were waiting for more than just answers. They were watching him, studying him in ways he couldn't fully understand. He wasn't just here to prove his mind and his body. He was here to prove something deeper, something about his heart. As the women relaxed, nodding to each other in approval, Jack turned to look around the clearing. His mind was still racing, but he couldn't help noticing something strange. Despite the pressure, despite the challenges, there was something peaceful about this place. The light of the glowing trees, the calm air, the soft hum of the stone. It all felt connected. Everything here was in harmony. Then, Jack's eyes fell on Renali. She was standing to the side, watching him with a look of quiet admiration. Renali was the first Thrissa he had spoken to, the one who had greeted him at the start of this strange journey. She had explained the ceremony and helped him understand some of their ways. Since then, Jack had felt a connection to her, something unspoken but strong. There was a warmth in her eyes now, a softness that hadn't been there before. She had always seemed distant, like she was watching from afar. But now, there was something different in her gaze. It was almost as if she were seeing him for the first time, not as an outsider, but as someone who might belong here. Renali stepped forward, her movements graceful as always, and Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of calm settle over him when she came close. She didn't speak at first, just watched him with those glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through him. For a moment, Jack felt exposed, like she could see everything inside him. But then, to his surprise, she smiled. "You have done well, Jack," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "I was not sure at first, but now I believe you have the strength we need." Jack blinked, unsure of how to respond. "Strength?" he asked. "I'm just trying to fix my ship and get out of here." Renali's smile deepened, and she stepped closer. "That may be true, but strength is more than just muscle, Jack. It is about understanding, about finding harmony. And I think you have found that." Jack didn't know what to say. He was still overwhelmed by everything that had happened, still trying to figure out how he fit into this alien world. But as he looked into Renali's eyes, he realized something. Maybe this wasn't just an accident. Maybe he was meant to be here, not just to fix his ship, but to help them in ways he couldn't yet understand. Renali reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture that felt unexpectedly comforting. "You may not know it yet, but you have already become a part of us," she said. "We have much to learn from you, and you from us." Jack felt a warmth spread through him, and for the first time since he crashed here, he felt like he wasn't just an outsider. He was part of something bigger, something that connected them all, no matter where they came from. The next trial was upon him, and Jack had no idea what to expect. He had passed the tests of balance and knowledge, but the Thrissa women had not yet shown any sign of slowing down. They were patient, observing him closely, as though waiting for something more. The calmness in the air was palpable, but it felt like the calm before a storm. Jack could feel the weight of their gazes, their expectations. Renali stood nearby, her eyes never leaving him. He could sense her silent support, but even she seemed unsure of what would happen next. The entire tribe was waiting for him to prove himself, not just in body and mind, but in something deeper. Jack still didn't fully understand what that was. "Now," the leader woman said, her voice breaking the silence, "we move on to the final trial. This is the test of heart." Jack swallowed. The test of heart. That sounded serious, more serious than anything he'd faced so far. He looked around, searching for any sign of what the trial might entail. The women parted, making room for a path to open up in the middle of the circle. A strange object stood at the end of the path, glowing softly under the light of the surrounding trees. It was a stone pedestal, and atop it rested what looked like a large, dark crystal. "This crystal is the Heartstone," the leader woman explained, her voice almost reverent. "It is said to reveal the true heart of anyone who touches it. If you are worthy, the Heartstone will bond with you. It will show you your true purpose. But if your heart is not pure, it will reject you." Jack frowned. He had no idea how to prove the purity of his heart. He wasn't a saint. He was just a guy who'd ended up on a strange alien world by accident. What could he possibly have in him that was pure enough to pass this test? The Thrissa women began to chant softly again, their voices rising in a rhythmic, almost hypnotic way. Jack took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, each beat louder than the last. "Step forward, Jack," the leader woman said. "Place your hand on the Heartstone, and it will reveal your heart." Jack hesitated for a moment. He didn't know what would happen, but there was no turning back now. He had to face whatever came next. With a deep breath, he stepped forward and approached the glowing pedestal. The crystal atop it glowed brighter as he drew closer, as if it was aware of his presence. When he reached the pedestal, Jack raised his hand and placed it gently on the Heartstone. The moment his fingers touched the surface, he felt a sharp jolt run through his arm, like a sudden shock of energy. The crystal began to pulse with a soft, warm light, and Jack's heart raced faster. The energy from the crystal seemed to flow through his hand, up his arm, and into his chest. He closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the sensation. It was as if the crystal was searching inside him, probing his thoughts, his memories. He could feel his past, his childhood, the friends he'd lost, the family he'd left behind, and the fear he felt when his ship crashed. Every emotion, every fear, every regret, it all rushed to the surface. Suddenly, he heard a voice. It wasn't in his ears, but in his mind. It was the voice of the Heartstone, ancient and wise. "Do you seek power?" the voice asked. "Do you seek to rule, to dominate?" Jack shook his head, not knowing if it could even hear him. "No," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I just want to go home. I just want to fix my ship and leave." The Heartstone pulsed again, the light growing brighter, but this time it was softer, gentler. The voice spoke once more. "Then prove that your heart is not selfish. Prove that you care for more than yourself." Jack closed his eyes tightly, the pressure in his chest building. He wasn't sure what it meant to prove his heart, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let this moment pass. He had to show them that he wasn't just here for himself. He had to show them that he understood what it meant to connect, to care for others. He thought of Renali, standing at the edge of the circle, watching him. He thought of the Thrissa people, the way they had welcomed him without question, without judgment. He thought of how they had waited for him, how they had believed he was the one who could unite the stars with their people. "I will help you," Jack said, his voice firm now. "I'll help you, even if I don't know how. I won't leave until I know I've done everything I can. I'm not just here for me. I'm here for all of you." The crystal's light grew even brighter, bathing Jack in a soft, golden glow. The energy in the air seemed to hum with approval. He could feel the Heartstone vibrating gently against his hand, and for a moment, he thought it was alive. And then the voice spoke again, this time with a note of warmth. "Your heart is pure," it said. "You have proven yourself. The bond is formed." Jack pulled his hand away from the Heartstone, his heart still racing, but now it felt different. The pressure was gone, replaced by a sense of peace. The Thrissa women stood silent, their eyes fixed on him, but Jack could see the approval in their faces. Renali stepped forward, her smile brighter than ever before. "You have done it, Jack," she said softly. "You have proven that you are worthy." Jack's breath came in slow, steady gasps. He couldn't believe it. He had passed the final trial. He had shown his heart, and they had accepted him. For the first time since he had crashed on this strange world, Jack felt like he truly belonged. Jack stood in the heart of the clearing, his hand still warm from the heartstone. The golden light had faded, and the clearing had returned to its tranquil state. The Thrissa women circled around him, their expressions shifting from curiosity to respect. He had passed the trials: balance, knowledge, and heart. But now, more than ever, Jack knew this was just the beginning. Renali stepped closer, her eyes glowing with pride. "You have done what many could not, Jack," she said, her voice soft but filled with admiration. "You have proven that you are more than just a traveler from another world. You are one of us now." Jack glanced around at the Thrissa women, still uncertain about what he had just done. He wasn't sure if he was ready to be one of them, but there was no denying that something had changed. The bond between him and the Thrissa people had been forged, and it was stronger than anything he had ever felt before. The leader woman, who had guided him through the trials, stepped forward. Her calm presence filled the space around them. "The trials are not just to test strength or wisdom," she said, her voice carrying an almost ancient weight. "They are to test the soul. They show us who you are and who you can become." Jack didn't fully understand what she meant, but he knew one thing. He had been chosen for something important. The Thrissa had made it clear that he had a purpose here, and he wasn't sure whether he was ready for that responsibility. Still, there was a sense of unity now, a sense that he wasn't alone in this alien world. "What happens now?" Jack asked, his voice quieter than he intended. He looked at Renali, hoping she might have an answer. Renali's smile was warm, reassuring. "Now we celebrate," she said. "You have earned your place among us, Jack. This is the beginning of a new journey, not just for you, but for all of us." Jack felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. He had done what was asked of him, but the path ahead was still uncertain. He wasn't sure how much he could help the Thrissa, or even what role he would play in their world. But one thing was clear: he was part of something bigger now. He wasn't just a stranded human anymore. He was part of the Thrissa tribe. The women began to gather around him, their movements graceful and fluid. They chanted softly again, their voices blending with the hum of the natural world. The air seemed to shimmer with energy, and Jack felt a strange pull, like the land itself was alive and welcoming him. "Let us show you the next step," the leader woman said. "You will now learn the ways of our people. You will understand what it means to live in harmony with the stars." Jack didn't know what that meant exactly, but he followed her as she led him deeper into the clearing, toward a circle of tall, glowing trees. Their trunks were made of something that looked like light, shifting and changing with each movement of the wind. Jack couldn't help but stare, mesmerized by their beauty. "We live in tune with the stars," the leader woman explained, her voice echoing in the stillness. "Our people have always believed that everything is connected. The stars, the trees, the animals, and the people. All are part of a greater harmony. It is this balance that keeps us strong." Jack tried to imagine what it would be like to live like that, to understand the world in such a deep and interconnected way. Back home, his life had been simple. He worked on ships, fixed things, and tried to stay out of trouble. But here, it felt like the world was alive in ways he couldn't even comprehend. Renali stepped up beside him, sensing his curiosity. "The stars guide us," she said softly. "We look to them for wisdom, for answers. The stars are our ancestors, watching over us. They are the reason we gather, the reason we survive. We live in harmony with them." Jack listened carefully, his mind racing. This was a different way of thinking, a different way of living. The idea that everything was connected, that the stars were more than just distant lights in the sky. They were part of a greater purpose. It was hard to grasp, but he felt something stirring inside him. Maybe this was what the Thrissa had been waiting for. Suddenly, the leader woman turned to face him. "Jack, you have passed the trials," she said, her voice filled with both pride and something deeper. "But there is one more step. It is a step that will decide if you are ready to help us." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had already faced 3 trials, but now there was another challenge ahead. He wasn't sure if he was ready for anything else. He had barely just begun to understand the Thrissa people, and now they were asking him to take on more. "What is it?" he asked, his voice shaky but determined. The leader woman smiled, her eyes gleaming with something that could only be described as wisdom. "It is not a trial, but a choice. We have always known that the stars are watching over us, guiding us. But we have also known that we must fight for our survival. There are enemies in the galaxy who seek to destroy us." Jack's stomach tightened. He had heard rumors of the Thrissa's enemies, but he hadn't expected them to bring it up so soon. "We need someone who can unite the stars," the leader continued, her voice steady. "Someone who understands the balance between strength and peace. We believe that you, Jack, can be that person. Will you help us?" Jack stood silent for a moment, trying to process what she was saying. The weight of her words settled heavily on him. Could he really do this? Could he help them in a way that mattered? His gaze met Rhinali's, and for the first time, he saw something more than just admiration in her eyes. There was trust that he could be the one to lead, to protect, to help the Thrissa survive. Jack took a deep breath, his resolve strengthening. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady now. "I'll help you. I don't know how yet, but I'll find a way." The leader woman nodded, her smile warm with approval. "Then welcome, Jack. You are now part of our tribe. Together, we will protect the balance of the stars." The weight of Jack's decision lingered in the air, but something inside him felt lighter, as though the universe itself had shifted. He had made a promise to the Thrissa, to help them, to stand with them against whatever threats lay ahead. But as he stood in the center of the glowing clearing, the reality of what he had just agreed to was beginning to sink in. He wasn't just a stranded human anymore. He was a part of something much bigger, a protector of the stars, as the Thrissa had called it. But could he live up to the responsibility they had entrusted to him? He had no training in war, no experience in leadership, but somehow he knew this was where he was meant to be. Rhinali stood by his side, her calm presence a comforting reminder that he wasn't alone in this. Her eyes were soft, understanding. She knew that Jack was still trying to come to terms with what he had just promised, but she also knew he had the heart and the spirit to carry through with it. "You don't have to do this alone," she said gently, her voice a soothing balm against his doubts. "We are here with you, every step of the way." Jack looked at her, feeling a sense of gratitude for her support. She had shown him kindness from the moment he had landed on this strange world. He wasn't sure how he could ever repay her, but he knew that helping the Thrissa was the first step. "Thank you, Rhinali," Jack said, his voice steady. "I don't know what the future holds, but I'm ready to face it with you." Rhinali's smile deepened, and she nodded, her eyes glowing with warmth. "Together, we will face whatever comes. We will protect this world, and we will protect each other." The Thrissa leader, who had been watching quietly, now spoke up. Her voice was firm, yet there was a hint of pride in it. "You have chosen well, Jack. The stars have chosen you as their protector, but there is much you must learn. We will teach you the ways of our people, the ways of the stars." Jack nodded, his heart filled with determination. He had never been one to back down from a challenge, and this one felt like it was worth everything he had. He might not fully understand what he was getting into, but he knew he had to try. For the Thrissa, for Rhinali, for everything he had learned since he crashed on this planet. The leader woman turned to the rest of the tribe, raising her arms in a gesture of unity. The others followed suit, their movements synchronized and graceful. Jack felt a sudden connection to them, as though the bond between them had already begun to form. "This is the beginning of a new era," the leader woman said, her voice carrying across the clearing. "With Jack, we will unite the stars. Together, we will ensure that the peace we have fought for will endure, and that our enemies will never destroy what we have built." Jack's heart beat faster at her words. The Thrissa weren't just survivors. They were warriors, protectors of their world and the universe itself. And now he was part of that fight. "What do we do now?" Jack asked, his voice filled with anticipation. The leader woman smiled at him. "Now we prepare. The stars are aligning, and the time is drawing near. The enemies who threaten us are powerful, but we are stronger. Together, we will fight for the future of our people." Jack's mind raced. The stars. Enemies. Fighting for the future. He had no idea where to begin, but he trusted the Thrissa. They had welcomed him, trained him, and now they were asking for his help. He couldn't back down now. "Tell me what I need to do," Jack said, his voice firm with resolve. Renali stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "The first step, Jack, is to understand the power of the stars. We are connected to them, as they are connected to us. The stars are not just distant lights. They are the source of our strength, our guidance. You must learn to harness that power, to feel it in your soul." Jack nodded slowly. Harness the power of the stars. It sounded impossible, but then again, so did everything that had happened since he crash-landed on this planet. He had learned to trust the Thrissa, and he knew they wouldn't ask him to do something he couldn't handle. "Where do we start?" Jack asked. Renali smiled, her eyes gleaming. "We start by opening your mind, Jack. We begin with the ancient teachings of our people. The stars have many secrets, and they are waiting for you to unlock them." Jack took a deep breath, his heart beating in rhythm with the pulse of the planet. This was it. This was his path forward. He had no idea where it would lead, but he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer alone. The Thrissa had become his family, and together they would face whatever challenges awaited them. As the night sky above began to shimmer with stars, Jack felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. The stars had guided him here, and now they would guide him forward. He didn't know what battles lay ahead or what dangers they would face, but he was ready to fight for the Thrissa and for the future of their world. With Renali by his side and the Thrissa tribe behind him, Jack felt more certain than ever that he had found his place in the universe. It was time to begin the journey of a lifetime.